Right, well, I think we'll get started. So first of all, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the life of Mariah Edgeworth, the date she was born and died, when she spent time in England, when she spent time in Ireland. I'm going to go through the fashions of the Georgian period, and then what I'm going to do is I have to do an extreme costume change. So I'm going to dip behind these screens here for hopefully about 10 minutes only, but because I will be able to hear you, we're going to take an opportunity at that point in time to answer a few questions about Georgian clothing, and when I come out in my Regency underwear, then I'll go through all of these, and then again I'll try and hopefully have left a few minutes at the end to allow you to ask some questions, either that you didn't ask in the first half or in the second half. So that is kind of breakdown. So if you have a question, just try and remember it, or hopefully I'll have answered it by the time I get through doing my thing. So, alright, so thank you for joining me for this talk today. My name is Melissa Shiels, soon to be Dr. Melissa Shiels, as I will be conferred with my doctorate in UCC this October. For this talk today, we're going to look at the fashions worn during the lifetime of Mariah Edgeworth, spanning approximately 40 years of her long life. And when I say fashions, I don't just mean fashions in clothing or in apparel, but fashions in practices as well. So like letter writing, traveling, visiting friends and shopping, those sorts of activities which filled her day and the days of women like her in her class in England and Ireland. So Mariah Edgeworth was born in 1768 and she died in 1849. And though born to a privileged class, her family were not extravagantly wealthy. They weren't nobility, they didn't have titles, they had never been presented at court to the king, none of that sort of thing. But they were the gentry class, which meant that they lived off the income generated by their vast estates. And I'm sure there's probably a local historian here who could tell you exactly what was owned by the Edgeworth estate and what wasn't. So the rent paid by their tenants enabled them to live this life, and money that was invested in government bonds provided them interest, which they lived off of annually. So like when you hear in Pride and Prejudice that Mr. Darcy has 10,000 a year, that was 4% interest. So the 10,000 he had was actually 4% of the money invested with government bonds. So he might have had I'm not good at maths, I'm not a mathematician, I'm a historian. So a lot of money was invested in the government bonds, and he got a percentage of that to live off of every year, and that's what the gentry class did. So Mariah was the second eldest of 22 children, and she was the oldest girl. She lived about 3 years in Ireland as a small child. Before her father moved his growing family back to England for a few years, where she was sent to boarding school. Not all girls of her class attended boarding school, but by this point in her life, in 1777, her mother had died. Her father had married her first stepmother, who was cold and critical of Mariah. The second Mrs. Edgeworth was slowly dying of consumption, hence the move to the slightly warmer climate of southern England, and combined with birthing 2 more children, perhaps the care of Mariah was too much for her, and that's why she went to a boarding school. In 1780, she was sent aged 12 to this fashionable boarding school in London to give her some polish and to hone the female accomplishments, which were dancing, drawing, music, French. But Mariah did not get on well in this establishment. She was very academic, and she didn't like this society sort of education. So in April 1782, after the second Mrs. Edgeworth had died and Mr. Edgeworth had married his third wife, his second wife's sister, he moved his family and wife and 8 living children, a couple had died, back to his estate in Ireland. So 1782, keep that in mind. Mariah was 14 at this time and was delighted to be out of London and living with her father in the country. She loved living in the country. And so this is where we're going to begin the exploration of her fashions. So for the first 25 years of Mariah's life, the undergarments of women's clothing, which is what I'm wearing now, this is underwear. Right? The undergarment of women's clothing basically remained unchanged. If you look at the shift there. So the first thing that every man, woman and child worn under the hat, sorry. Next to the skin was a shift or a chemise of linen. So this is a women's shift. You can see it goes just down to under the knee. There's quite a broad, deep neckline, and it's made of linen. Linen was pretty much ubiquitously the undergarment of this time. That's because it's very absorbent and it's very cooling. It absorbs liquid and it evaporates it almost immediately because it's made from the long stem fibers in the flax plant, whereas things like cotton are made from the short fibers that are, teased out of the top on the cotton plant. So its long fibers help to evaporate moisture very quickly. It is actually the only fabric that is stronger when wet than it is when dry, so you can scrub the snot out of it and it'll really take a beating, right? So this is what they changed every single day, and this is what they absolutely scrubbed and laundered. They were often embroidered with initials and a number, I haven't done that, at the back. And so they would number how many shifts they had, and the housekeeper, when she was retrieving them from the laundry and putting them in their presses, would make sure to put the recently worn ones on the bottom, so there was a constant regulation, so one didn't get worn too much and wore out, and there was like a constant rotation. So that was the shift, often called a shift because it would shift the dirt and the sweat away from the body as you wore the next thing. So over the shift is worn stays, which you can see here. This is what we would effectively call a corset in today's modern language. This is a very durable one, not a very fancy one because it's made of very durable linen and cotton. You see all these lines in it, all these channels. There is reed, which has been inserted into these, usually 2 or 3 reeds per channel, and it is laced up the back like so, in a pattern called spiral lacing. So the lace goes down like this. It doesn't crisscross like we think of lacing today. You can put this on yourself. I dressed myself this morning without any help at all. But obviously, if you are wealthy, you have a lady's maid who will dress you. Exactly. This is Mrs. Billamore, the Edgeworth's housekeeper. So you would be laced into this. Now, this was not a torture device. It wasn't meant to cinch in the waist and give an impossibly small waist. It was meant to give back support primarily and bust support. So the straps here, the pieces are cut very narrow, and with the straps are adjustable, it pulls the shoulders back, right? Gives you this amazing posture. And usually when I say that, everybody sits up a little straighter. It did give bust support, as you can see. It nips in the waist a tiny bit, but not a whole lot. That's not what it's about. So that is the stays. And from about the age of 14, Mariah, even earlier, would have been wearing stays to kind of form her comportment as a young lady. So not only was it support for the body, but it provided a very smooth surface for the gowns and the garments to go over. The body didn't have to be the desirable silhouette or the fashionable silhouette. The clothing did the work for you. Nowadays, we kill ourselves in the gym and through diet to try and make our bodies look a certain way. But back then, the clothing actually achieved that. And you could be fashionable without starving yourself or, running yourself into the ground. I know, I'm like, absolutely. So over that is worn a petticoat. We would call this a skirt. These basically, what they do is they're essentially just 2 panels of fabric. So they have ties at the front and ties at the back. And so what I like to do is I tie the back one around first, and I kind of lodge a knot under that gap in the petticoat, or in the stays, and then I tie the second panel up over it. Now you may ask, what are these things that you have hanging off of you here? These are pockets. Women had capacious pockets, and they were often highly embroidered, things that they made for themselves or gifts for friends. So you could fit quite a lot in here. So they often would carry around like handkerchiefs and that sort of thing, to wipe the face or the hands. They might carry a snuff box. Snuff was incredibly popular. In fact, Queen Charlotte was often known as Snuffy Charlotte because she enjoyed taking snuff so much. Mariah did not seem to like snuff, and she wrote in quite a few of her letters, anytime a woman took snuff, she commented on it. So I think she very much did not take snuff and had opinions about women who did. You might carry around something called a hussif, or a housewife, with you. This was essentially a portable sewing kit. So there would be pins and a case to hold a thimble, a needle case to hold your needles, different types of thread on thread winders, so you can make little repairs to your garment as you needed it. All sorts of bits and pieces. I've got a seam ripper in here for ripping seams that you made a mistake on. So this was also another thing that could be carried in the pockets. And then to kind of complete the basic underwear ensemble, we have stockings and garters. So these are the stockings. They were almost always made of silk. Of course, in the winter you would wear also wool ones, probably over the silk for extra warmth. These were often highly decorated with these designs, and this is called clocking, what they did here. And how these were held on was with garters. So these again could be very fancy. They could just be silk ribbons, like I've got here, or you could take a piece of ribbon with other ribbons attached and basically tie it around there, and these would keep these stockings up just under the knee. So that's how those went on. And the shoes were basically always heeled, and they would be put on with little buckles. You did have slippers at the time, but this is effectively, I need to have a little support now. These are effectively what the shoes look like that we are probably familiar with from seeing images of colonial America and places like that. So this is the undergarments, and while I'm still just in my undergarments, I'm going to go through the hair and beauty routine that the Edgeworth women and women like them went through. So first of all, I need to put on a dusting gown or a dusting robe, because I'm going to use quite a bit of powder in this, and I don't want my clothes underneath to get all caked in powder. So I'll put that on. Now, first things first, in the morning, your maid would bring in, a warm bowl of water and some soap, and you would wash your hands, use the soap, dry your hands off. You do this with your face. And if you were very freckled and you did not want to be very freckled, you could buy a liquid to efface spots and marks. So you would dab this on and hopefully wipe away your freckles, and we all know how freckle getting rid of is not very effective even in this day and age, but it was something some women tried to use. Once the face was cleansed, they would wear a white sort of face paint, I guess we would call it, for all intents and purposes, a foundation, but not to make the skin look darker, but to make it look porcelain white. I'm not going to put it on my face because it wasn't worn in the Regency, but can you just see how white it makes the hand look? Now, this would be applied very thickly in France and very sparingly in England. So there were regional variations where they had preferences. They wore a lot of makeup in France and not so much in England. And once your face had been that white kind of almost like stage makeup, we would call it, or pancake it's called in acting circles, then you would powder it. And the powder was often made from extremely finely ground rice powder. So because the white paint essentially was so sticky, the powder would stick to it quite well. Now, they liked to accentuate certain features in the 18th century. So in the 18th century, what they chose to accentuate was the eyebrows. So a half moon shape was very popular, and one way they did this was they took cloves, whole cloves, they would burn them, and they would leave the stems on, and they would effectively use that as like an eyeliner sort of thing, like a brow pencil. So they would darken their eyebrows and fill in any patchy bits with burnt cloves, and that was a very non-toxic way, frankly, of doing that. So that's the makeup. You could, of course, augment or hide any defects, if you liked, with a mouche, which is the French word for fly, but that was effectively what these beauty patches or beauty spots were. I do have a freckle right here, so I'm going to accentuate it with a mouche, right? So they would often put these above the lip, which would mean kiss me, or near the eye, like this would mean I have my eye on you, sort of thing. If they put on the tip of their nose, that meant I'm married or stay away, basically. So that's not very attractive, you know. So there was kind of a language, they say, that developed around where you put the beauty spot meant certain things. So that is the beauty. Now let's discuss the hair. This is not all my own hair. I don't have this voluminous amount of hair, and neither did most women back then. They used a variety of techniques to achieve very high hair. So the cleaning technique that they used was called a combination called pomatum and powder, or pomade and powder. So the pomatum, or the pomade, was like a sticky wax-like substance made from spermaceti, which is a substance found in the nose of the sperm whale. So they had to practice whaling to get this. And this was kind of like a hair gel or hair wax. And so they would coat all of their tresses with this wax, essentially. And this was very deep conditioning. Like it's like a deep conditioning mask almost. And then to give it grip, they would powder it. And again, they would use crushed rice powder, and they would like work it into the tresses of the hair. And this was often done, either in the morning or maybe at night. So they would work this powder into the hair, and this made the hair very sculptural. So you could do lots of stuff with it, because now it really has grip and it has a lot of substance or body to it. So then, if you're still not blessed with massive amounts of hair, you would use hair cushions. So depending on the shape you want, you could put one, say on the top of your head, and then take your own hair and style it over the cushion to achieve this volume. And these came in all shapes and sizes. Like this is one from the late 1770s when they did the enormous high ones that they would like wear a ship in, that sort of thing. So like this provided a base for all of their own hair and other fake hair pieces to go in. Women didn't wear full wigs like men did, but they augmented it with these cushions and other sorts of things. Now, they often cleaned out their combs and hairbrushes, and they kept their own hair. And these are called rats, right? This is my own hair that I've collected over the years. I've got some more in here. And basically, you collect your hair, you wash it and you roll it in a dry towel, and then you can stitch it together in shapes. And then when you need to get a bit more volume, you put this in and it matches because it's your own hair. So that's how you would augment that. But if you still wanted a bit more ease and less difficulty, you could buy fake hair pieces sold by poor women who had their hair cut off to earn money. You could buy things like buckles, which were pre-made hair curls or rolls, and these would get pinned into the side backs of the hair at certain points in the century when it was popular. It wasn't popular the whole time. Now, to curl their own hair, they used a technique called papilote curling or paper curling. So again, once they had I know this looks like a speculum, but don't worry, it's not. After they had coated their hair with the pomade and powder, if they wanted to curl their own hair, they would roll it around their fingers into a curl. They would take a triangular piece of paper, think like tissue paper, cut into a triangle, right? And I have them and I didn't bring them. So they would kind of wrap the triangular paper around the curl. And you'd have a couple of these, right? A couple of these in a brazier, so coals heating these up. And the hairdresser or the maid, you would try to hire a lady's maid who's good at hair. First, she'd do the whole hair in the papers, so get it prepared. And then, when these were hot enough, you'd test one on a piece of paper, and when it stopped singeing, it was ready, it was the right temperature. And then they would go along and clamp each of those little parcels to heat it up and set the pomade into the curl, right? To set it into a curl shape. And when this got too cool, they'd put that back in the brazier, grab a different one and keep clamping and curling all the way around. So you could sleep in it like that, and then the next morning take out all the papers, you've got this gorgeous head of curly hair, and then style it up over a cushion and put on caps or all sorts of different things. Perfect. So realistically, I would not go out of the house with my hair like this. I wouldn't even sit around the house with my hair like this. You should have some sort of lacy, frilly, gauzy confection sitting on your head during the daytime at least to show just propriety. We've got some different caps here. This is a monstrous 1770s one to go over those huge hairstyles, and then a smaller 1790s one as the fashion started to change, and then a very see-through silky one for the 1780s that just kind of jauntily sat atop the monstrous hairstyle. So now we're going to go back into Mariah's own time and discuss what she herself likely wore at certain points in her life. So like I said, in 1782, perfect. 1782, during her childhood years, Mariah would have worn what basically all children wore, both boys and girls, because both boys and girls wore effectively the same thing for the first 7-8 years of their life. Men's clothing required some very difficult buttoning to achieve, especially in the trousers, and small boys are kind of known for, ignoring their toilet cues when they're having fun playing, and so boys would also wear skirts or dresses as small children because it was much easier to go to the toilet quickly while wearing this. You may have noticed I didn't mention anything about knickers or anything like that. That's because there were none. So under the shift or the shirt was your underwear. So there were no, oh no, don't tell me I've got a knot. There were no knickers to get in the way. So they just were free and easy underneath that, basically. Sorry. So, like I said, boys and girls all wore the same kind of thing, and it was like this white kind of dress, effectively. Now, the reason I have one in a grown-up size is because for a brief period in the 1780s, it actually became fashionable for grown women to wear effectively what was children's wear, right? And this was popularized by no one other than Marie Antoinette, the French queen. In 1783, she was painted, oh no, I lost the drawstring, oh well. She was painted wearing this style of gown, which was effectively, like I said, children's wear. And so this became known as the chemise à la reine. And anything the Queen wore soon became high fashion. She even sent one to Georgiana, the Duchess of Devonshire. And so the fashion then swept basically England and Ireland as a fashionable garment. You can see it just ties on with some couple of drawstrings in a few key places. And I have lost the drawstring here, so I'm going to have to leave that. But this would often be accessorized, because it is a very plain style, this would often be accessorized with, sashes, extremely long sashes in different colors with gigantic bows tied at the back to kind of, introduce a bit of variety and color and difference to this style of garment. So this was incredibly popular, like I said, for grown women from about 1783 to 1789, but Mariah would have been wearing this style as a child regardless, because this was the style that children wore. So going back to 1782 though, when she travelled from England to Ireland as a teenager, they likely would not have been wearing this style of garment. What she and her stepmother, her Oh, I'm stepping on it. I knew something was tugging. What she and her stepmother likely wore was something called a redingote. I'm losing all of the drawstrings there. That's all right. I'm just going to endlessly be taking clothes off and putting them on this whole time. Thank you. So the redingote was actually based on menswear, and what it is basically a French borrowing of the word riding coat, right? And because the French pronounce things the way they do, it became exceedingly popular in France. And then when the English kind of borrowed the word back, basically they kind of would pronounce it the way the French did. So first of all, I'm wearing something called a riding shirt, or habit shirt. And this was very much based on men's clothing. You can see it's got a high neck instead of the low neck. And it's got this ruffle, basically like a cravat, that goes down the front. It buttons up at the neck and it buttons at the cuffs. I'm not going to bother my names. So this again is underwear, and because you are riding on horseback, you might need a little extra padding. So I'd like to put on a bum, basically, and this provided a bit of extra padding for riding on horseback, but also it provides the shape. Remember, the body does not have to be the ideal shape. The clothing does the work for you. And by this point in time, the fashion earlier in the 1770s and for most of the century was to have enormous fabric out of the sides, the hips, but by the 1780s we're moving all that volume to the back. Now nobody has arses that are actually this big, so you use cushions to help you achieve that. Now we've got the petticoat. You'll be very sick of watching me putting petticoats on and off, but you can see it actually doesn't, it's fairly easy to do. Now this is a dark green wool. This was very common material and colour for redingotes. Wool, because it really stands up to wear and tear. Like if you're riding in a horse, if you're riding in a carriage, that sort of thing, it keeps you warm if it's cold. If it gets dusty, which it's very likely to do, you can just beat the dust out of it or the dry mud off of it, and it can be immediately cleaned. And when you're traveling, they thought it was best to have like dark, somber colours, again to hide that dirt and that dust. Now, women did actually travel quite a bit in this period. The young men, first of all, in the century went on something called the Grand Tour, if you've heard of that before. Kind of to complete their education once they'd finished at Oxford or Cambridge or any of those institutions. They would go for, maybe up to a year, traveling all over continental Europe, basically through France to Italy, seeing all the sights of the classics, the classical world, the sculpture, the paintings, the artwork, that sort of thing. So eventually, by the end of the century, women, particularly like English women, started going on the Grand Tour as well across continental Europe. And that's where the French saw them wearing these very masculine styles. Oh, can you do it, please? What's so nice? Yeah, so I'll hold this up. And if you go from the bottom to the top.
I just want to be too precise.
No, you're grand. So you'll notice that this is got buttons on it. That was extremely unusual for women's clothing. Buttons don't really allow for adjustability. If you've got buttoned clothing, like it's not going to get any bigger. Do you know what I mean? So most of women's clothing actually was highly adjustable because the body made a few changes. Pregnancy every couple of years, breastfeeding, natural body changes in your monthly cycle. So all of these women's clothing had to accommodate that. They didn't have specialised maternity wear. They wore the same clothing that they wore all the time, and they just adjusted how they wore it. Thank you. No, you're grand, Kitty. We'll keep you on. So. Oh, did I do this wrong? No. Okay. So these were not often trimmed. They didn't put really any decoration or trim on them. They thought that was quite tawdry to wear like a lot of trim or decoration on it. They liked the smooth, clean lines of how it looked on its own. Now the French, when they borrowed this, they would make it out of silk and they would wear it as city wear. Not when they were travelling, that sort of thing. So, but I mean, a silk redingote isn't going to do very good on horseback. It's going to get destroyed. So for practical purposes, this is what they wore. When they were riding horses, or even out of doors if they were taking walks, or going in carriages around their estates, or to visit their friends on their estates, they would wear these buff-coloured gloves in particular, to protect the hands from obviously holding reins and that sort of thing, but also from the sun, so you didn't get sunspots on your skin and you kept nice white, lily white hands sort of thing. And to top it all off, I'm going to read you a quote from the year 1770 by an Englishman who was travelling in Ireland and described a young Irish woman that he saw wearing this ensemble. So, hold on.
Wow.
A hat at a jaunty angle, right? So, thank you. I'm going to stab it through with a hat pin into the hair cushions, not the scalp. There we go. Okay. So Arthur Young wrote in 1770, he describes a young Irish woman wearing a redingote ensemble while travelling in a coach from Athlone to Dublin. So he wrote, she was dressed in a plain riding habit with a hat and feather. You would rather praise the neatness than the richness of her dress. And one very funny anecdote from his observation about the young lady was, at some point in time, like I think it was at Mullingar or something, a young man gets into the carriage. And he obviously is quite taken with her, so he starts like trying to chat her up. And they actually speak in Irish for a while, because Arthur Young writes, oh, they spoke in their own language, but then they switched to English. And the young man starts trying to find out, oh, do you know the McMahons from this town? Do you know the Dooleys from this town? And they finally found somebody that they knew in common. I'm like, it never changes. Things in Ireland never change. Like, it's still the same. So now, the riding habit was considered a form of undress. And you know, to look at the amount of clothing that I have on me, you're going, what? How can that be undress? That's a lot of clothes for undress. But clothing was broken down into two categories at the time. So there was undress, which was for informal activities, and there was full dress, which was for formal activities. Clothing was activity-based. So undress actually covered quite a few categories of dress. So yes, while I was if I'm going out riding, I would be wearing a redingote or that sort of a thing. But if I'm sitting embroidering, if I'm sitting embroidering or practicing dancing or playing music, I'm not going to wear a redingote. And when people wore things out of the place or the activity, it was often written about. There is an account in the 1780s of a man given out that women were wearing redingotes to a ball. So he was saying, the undress is very, or to church, like in the house of God, they were wearing basically these redingotes, these extremely informal type of garments. Now, church was not a formal activity, contrary to what we might believe. It was actually an informal activity, but a redingote was not the appropriate thing to wear for that particular activity. What you might wear for any of those other activities is the next style I'm going to put on. So here I'm putting on a different bit of padding, as you can see, and then I have another petticoat to go over that. This ensemble that I'm going to wear is called a caraco jacket and a petticoat. Again, extremely informal because it is a jacket and not a full gown, even though it is made of silk. And people really did kind of stick to the social or the societal norms of the day for what to wear. When they didn't, they actually kind of told on themselves, like they wrote about it. So for instance, no, that'll go on afterwards. Emily, the Duchess of Leinster, Emily Fitzgerald, the Duchess of Leinster, she was written about saying that she wore full dress with diamonds to dinner every evening. So she was very much maintaining the sartorial norms of the period. But the same woman, Mary Delaney, who wrote about what Emily was wearing, she once told on herself when she was writing a letter to her sister in England, and she said, "Oh, I didn't have any visitors staying, and I couldn't be arsed, basically, getting dressed from, from undress into full dress. There was no visitors. So we just stayed in the same clothes for dinner." Now, Mariah did seem to change her clothing for dinner. She did always seem to follow that kind of social, I know it's an absolute nightmare to get through these sleeves. She did seem to very strictly follow, I might have to lace tighter all the time. She did seem to very much follow these social conventions, because she often wrote letters to her friends and family when she was, let's say when she was in England. She would keep up a daily correspondence with her aunt and her sisters and her cousins back in Ireland. And so she would basically say "Oh, I should be getting dressed, but I've spent the time writing to you instead, and now I've only got 15 minutes. And this was a constant thing. I've come across at least 4 instances of where she's I spent my time letter writing instead, and I only have 15 minutes now to get this. So this is an example of the clothes pinning together that I kind of hinted at in the redingote. Now, I could definitely lace tighter. There is a tiny bit of a gap, but I'm going to cover that over. In the daytime, it was not considered appropriate to show your décolleté, right? So they would kind of cover up with neck handkerchiefs or fichus that would cover the bodice or the bosom basically during the day. And they would do this with basically all sorts of various different things. They didn't have anywhere near as much clothing in their wardrobes as we have. Even wealthy people did not have the vast wardrobes that we have nowadays. They might have 3 gowns, right? But what they did have in abundance in their wardrobes is they had dozens upon dozens of those shifts and chemises that I showed you. And they had quite a lot of these neck handkerchiefs and things like that, fichus, the French called them, in all sorts of different styles. So this one, as you can see, has lace on it. Hopefully I'm covering the gap where I didn't pin myself properly. This one has lace on it. This one has, a big ruffle on it, sort of thing, so you might put that on instead. You could have plain ones, all sorts of things. You could also dress up the outfit with aprons for the daytime, not serviceable aprons. These weren't aprons to cook your dinner in, sort of thing. But if you were sitting around and embroidering, this would, any threads or crumbs that got on it could easily be brushed off or wiped off. And, this would help change the look then. If you stayed in this, you would take these things off for the evening, and then you kind of went from day wear to evening wear, sort of thing. And you put on some jewellery instead to kind of mark the difference between an informal look and a more daytime look, or a evening sort of look. You might wonder, didn't their arms get cold with all these short sleeves? And basically what they would wear is mitts. So these would be, well, that one's tight. I'm not going to put on a tight one. These were basically, I'm too warm. These are basically kind of like mitts. I don't know how else to describe it. They went on the arm and they kind of covered the fingers, but they left the fingers clear because this flap could be folded back. So you could keep doing writing or any fine embroidery, that sort of thing. Your hands would be clear, but the backs of them would kind of be covered and warm if it was cold. And again, these could be made of wool, like these ones, or you could have silk ones if you didn't need a lot of heat. Some very fancy ones from French images show like ones lined in fur. So that would certainly keep your little arms warm if it was too cold. I'm just going to unpin here. Sorry. So we will go now from daywear.
That was daywear.
This is daywear, yeah. Now you could wear this in the evening, like I said, by kind of exposing the bosom, essentially, and dressing it up with diamonds or sorts of jewellery, that sort of thing. But you wouldn't wear this still to the most formal of places. So you wouldn't wear in the most formal places, the most formal activities were essentially a ball and the opera. So you would wear this to church, you would wear this shopping, you would wear it visiting friends, writing letters, that sort of thing. But you wouldn't wear it to a ball or to the opera. For that, you would put on, oh gosh, I'm still wearing the daywear petticoat. For that, you would put on the most formal type of gown, which was called a robe à la française. Okay, so this again requires a different form of. These are called pocket hoops. In French, they were called panier, which means basket, because it's essentially like wearing baskets on your hips. And it's very lightweight though, like there's no weight to it whatsoever, but it provides the function of spreading the fabric out. So that's what it did. So again, ties around the waist, and then the petticoat goes on. I'm not going to fully put this on because it's a bit of a beast. But you can see why it would be worn for full dress, because it was very formal. Now this style was kind of a residual holdover from earlier in the century. By the 1780s it had really gone out of fashion. It was still worn at the French court twice a week for their twice weekly ball, but it wasn't high fashion anymore. It was like kind of old fashioned, and they were still stuck like in the rigid fashions of the earlier part of the century. So this is the petticoat for it, and then what goes over this now is called a stomacher. So this gets pinned to the stays underneath, and then the robe goes along the top of that. Now these could be extremely ornamented. I mean, and they just cost thousands upon thousands. Like they were, the most expensive, exquisite brocades and all sorts of fabric made of silver, like cloth of silver. What I'm wearing is a brief fad in the 1770s where they would wear all white gowns with all white trim. And there's kind of about a 2-year period in the 1770s when this was all the rage. And how they went on, it's kind of like a jacket, but you can see there's an adjustable back panel in the back. So if you were pregnant or what have you, you could open this out more, and this would then wrap around the body. Now, I'm not going to fully put this on, but thank you. You can see it's got what we call watteau pleats, which were pleated fabric at the back that falls from the shoulder blades and basically falls into this humongous train at the back. And this would then get pinned down the two sides, so the stomacher covers that. And this was the most formal style of gown. And this, of course, would be worn, all sorts of diamonds and jewellery, and they put all sorts of things in their hair. If you can hand me the very fancy one with the silk bows and feathers. I'm sorry you're not getting the full effect by me not pinning this on, but this would be like perched on top of the hair sort of thing, like, dainty little like pieces like this that basically would like coordinate and match with the gown and provide like visual interest. So this was the most formal style of gown. We don't know if Mariah or her stepmothers ever wore this sort of thing, because it was worn to balls, and Mariah did not particularly care for going to balls. I'm going to read you quite a long quote. Where did it go? Here we go. Mariah didn't particularly care for going to balls. She wrote to a friend of hers back in the boarding school that she had been at. She wrote to a friend, she said, "I'm inclined to believe that it is all the preparations, the music, the dress, the praise and the bustle, which constitute the charms of a ball. You are active, nimble, and dance well. I am awkward and dance very ill. It is not therefore the least surprising that you should be happy in a ballroom where you are praised, or that I, on the contrary, with every personal disadvantage, should feel myself much less at my ease in company than among friends who set little comparative value on such qualifications." Now, it was actually her stepmother who had harshly told her that she danced really badly and like gracelessly. So it seems that she never really took any joy in dancing or anything like that. Now, the Edgeworths did have a dancing master come to the house to teach the children how to dance. So Mariah certainly knew how to dance, but it seems like she didn't really enjoy it based on kind of the quite earlier criticism that she had faced in her childhood. So, as I stated about the robe à la française, fashions started to change. This formal style fell out of fashion, so even in the French court, by the very end of the 1780s, they weren't really wearing the robe à la française anymore. And of course, we have the very start of the French Revolution in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille. So kind of this formality fell out of fashion. But one thing that they picked up on was that earlier style. Do you remember the first gown I showed you, the chemise à la reine, the children's dress? That actually influenced the next fashion styles that came about. And they started to look to Greek and Roman statuary for their inspiration for the next fashion trend. So fashions in hair also changed quite dramatically. No longer did you have, hair cushions and all sorts of things. Now, they did still augment their own hair, but everything kind of took a turn, I would say, for the natural, but we all know that natural makeup is actually just makeup that doesn't look like you're wearing it while you actually are wearing it. Like, we all know that, right? So I'm going to do a quick change. Well, hopefully it'll be quick. Behind this screen here, I have to do an extreme clothing change because the stays changed shape quite dramatically, and even the shift started to change, not the shape so much, but the material it was made out of. And that was largely down to the American slave labor. So cotton became incredibly cheap, not only in America, but in all of Europe, because of enslaved labor. If you don't have to pay your workforce, you can afford to sell your goods far cheaper. So even people in Europe started wearing more cotton, and this is actually like a direct result of enslaved labor, basically in the United States. Even though it had been outlawed in Britain, I think sometime in the 1770s, it really impacted the fashions worldwide. So we need to acknowledge that, that was a key force in the changing sartorial practices. So I've nearly, you'll see how little hair I actually have left once I've taken down the hair cushions and everything. Oh. They must have really enjoyed taking it down at the end of the night, I'd say. I'm going to lose the petticoat and the shoes. Everything just really underwent massive changes, and I will come out again in Regency underwear. But like I said, while I'm doing this, I can answer some questions from behind the screen, if you're all right with that. I might start by taking a couple questions now while I just unlace a little bit. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask? First of all.
Well, I was just thinking, would women's days have started much later? You know, would appointments be later, given that there was so much to get to do?
It depends. In town, everything started much later because they kind of partied until late at night. And in the country, they kept different hours. So they stayed up, they went to bed a little bit earlier, you know, and so consequently they got up a little earlier. In fact, in the town, in the country, the men got up very early to go hunting. And that was kind of one of the primary occupations for men out in the country, was the hunt. And women often joined them. In fact, Lady Louisa Connolly, she was extremely fond of going out for like an early morning walk with her little dog, or an early morning ride on her horse. So we know that she wore like a redingote basically every day, and sometimes she kind of just wore her redingote all the time and didn't bother changing. So like in the country, yeah, they got up a bit earlier. In fact, there's a delightful quote that I read just the other day, where Mariah had stayed with a family in England in town with them, and she thought they were going to keep their same dining hours in the country as they kept in town as they kept in the country. And they got to the house late. Like the carriage ride just took much longer then. And the dinner had been ready for a full hour, and everybody was waiting them for a full hour. And she said, oh my God, we were so mortified. We were all cross with each other because like we arrived late and everybody's waiting and dinner was sitting there for an hour. And they normally dined at 7 in town for their dinner, but in the country they dined at 6. And she didn't know that, like on the way to their house, and she was horrified by their rudeness, you know, her and her sister's rudeness. So, but the dressing doesn't take that long. It's really the hair that takes that long. But if you have an experienced maid who can do it for you, it's not actually that bad. And you have to remember, women didn't have to do the school run. Do you know what I mean? Like, they didn't have to do the school run. They didn't have to do, like, they didn't have a job that they had to go to. Their job was taking care of the home and being the social glue that, like, helped their husbands to socialize. Yeah. I was just going to say something else, and I lost my train of thought, but oftentimes, as they were getting ready, they would have friends call over, or they would even have, like merchants or businessmen, that sort of thing, call over to the house, and they would like settle up their bills and stuff like that, or they would dictate letters to their, you know, to their secretary or to their maid, or they'd write their own letters while they're getting ready. It actually wasn't like taboo to get ready in front of other people. So like obviously they'd have their wash and they'd get on their first layers and that sort of stuff first of all. But then like if they were having their hair done because they had like a big major, you know, ball they were going to that evening and their hair needed to be absolutely perfect, like it was not a big deal to have your friends call over while you were having your hair done. Kind of like today, you know, like it's not, you know, if you go to a hairdresser with your friends or something, you're not embarrassed to be having your hair done, you know, at the same time as your friend, sort of thing. So there was very much a sociability aspect to getting dressed that that existed at the time. Does that answer the question?
It certainly does.
Oh, good. Any other questions?
When you said people just had like 3 dresses, did that mean they had one wedding coat, one day dress, one evening dress, or would they have had?
Well, I say 3 gowns. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating. They probably had more than just 3. It very much depends on kind of class and circumstance. The Edgeworth women didn't just have 3 gowns. Do you know what I mean? They had more than that, but nowhere near like 20, 30, 50 pieces of garment like we have nowadays.
Yes, I was just wondering, could you show up in the same clothes every day? That's
You could, because you basically accessorized with different accessories. So this will be very obvious when I do this in the Regency period, how they would use little bits of fabric to basically, Niamh, can you come grab the top X?
yes.
Yeah, and pull that. There we go. Okay. And then pull the next X beneath that. Or actually, I can get that. Okay. All right.
Was there any influence?
Here. I'll let you see how I'm doing this. So they would use very little bits of fabric, like I said, those fichus and things like that, to change the look of a garment. They might like outfit repeat and wear the same thing a couple of days in a row, or they would they might, you know, leave it kind of every other day sort of thing and try to change up the look. When I was looking through Mariah's letters when she was in England, she often wrote about quite a lot about what her sisters were wearing. And I noticed like that they wore this white merino gowns to different functions. She said the first wearing was, you know, this one date or whatever, and then a couple of weeks later she wrote again that they were wearing it. Now that's not to say they didn't wear it in between those couple of weeks, but that, you know, she just felt like describing what her sisters were wearing at that stage. You'll see as I'm lacing
Yeah, it's a shape.
that you can do it yourself, it just requires some dexterity. But the whole point of kind of being rich and having servants is making other people do things for you that you could do yourself and you don't want to. I just find I kind of like to lace myself because I know how tight I like to go, and actually I do like to be laced quite tightly, not because I'm vain, although I am, but because it genuinely kind of does feel better to have the support of the gown, like the back support and stuff. Now the Regency gowns are not heavy, they are just, you know, they're very floaty actually, but I do like kind of the bust support and the shoulder support. You'll notice how I just simply do that. Now I'm going to need to come and hide again for this next bit. I'm going to insert something called a busk down the front of this. There's a pocket, an inner pocket on the inside of the stays. You'll notice that the bust now, instead of lifting and pushing together, the bust, the stays now lift and separate. So the bosoms are now in separate cups as opposed to the kind of all smushed together. And then what you do is there are holes drilled into the busks, and this gets tied with a little lace to secure it to these stays so it doesn't shift about.
Really nice, thank you.
I can see, but I just can't get it.
What was the stays made of?
So this one is made of wood. Very often they were made of ivory or whalebone. And in fact, sailors often would try to get their hands on whalebone, and they would do a technique called scrimshaw, which was basically like carving like hearts and little poems and such into the busk. Then they would give it to their sweetheart, and of course, because it's worn right here, it was, you know, almost very, it was very sweet, but it could be very erotic, you know, so, and that was kind of like a sign that like, hey, look, we're truly in a serious relationship here now, because I'm giving you something that's worn, you know, so close to the body and such an intimate garment. So you can see a real difference now in the stays of this period. Now these are long stays, because I am a fuller figured woman, but they did also have short stays. So this kind of looks more like a modern bra that we'd be used to. And again, you can see the separate cups. And this one laces down the front. So if you weren't quite as fuller figured, you could get away with a set of short stays to wear. Now, like I said earlier when I was undressing, the shift changes a little bit. There's no longer longer sleeves, it's very short sleeves, and again, made of cotton a lot of the time. Linen still was used, but really cotton because of its cheapness due to enslaved labour. Now, I need to obviously keep covering up, and because the gowns that go over this are very sheer, you would wear a petticoat. But now the petticoat has really changed from basically a 2-panel skirt that goes around the waist to sometimes a multi-paneled but not very big skirt that goes just up under the underbust, basically. The natural waistline, where it had been in the 18th century, is now moved up to the underbust. So this is now the waistline, effectively, for all the garments. So in the 1790s, we have a very transitional style of gown. Like I said, it goes back to that kind of classical look of Greek and Roman statuary. The French tended to favour the styles worn in Greek statues, and the British, with its empire, tended to favour Roman styles. So now this gown, already you can see a difference. It goes on over the head, unlike the other gowns, which were more like jackets. There is an internal lining panel here. Again, this is made of linen, and this gets pinned. We're still using pins. This gets pinned to that strip of fabric that the busk is in, because it's a nice, really solid panel that you can pin into, and you're not going to risk, pinning yourself at all. So this gets like crossed over, and the pins placed into that. And then the top of it, simply, quite like the chemise à la reine, uses drawstrings to fit to the body. So we've got an underbust drawstring that first gets tied, and then we cover up les boubages with a top drawstring. Now, this is very simple looking compared to the earlier styles. I mean, there's much less fabric in it, but it is quite feminine still, quite flowing. And just like you would with the chemise à la reine, you would use different like sashes perhaps to tie around the waist, or you might use an open robe, something like that. So this would give a lot of variety to this simple white gown. So you might have 5 or 6 white gowns that you're working on rotation, but you want to make them look a little bit different every day. So now I'm going to do my hair for the moment. So Regency hair and makeup was very different from Georgian hair and makeup. Gone was the white face paint, gone was the very visible powder, and they didn't really do the pomade and powder routine anymore. So although they still did make pomatum to kind of like smooth flyaways, that sort of a thing, but it wasn't the deep conditioning and structural thing that it was before. The pomatum could be bought as is, but it also was possible to buy the ingredients and have the servants make it. So in 1816, Mariah wrote to a friend saying, Marianne, who's one of their maids, has taken the jar of down to the flagged rooms, a room with flag stones on the floor, to pound the pomatum. So sometimes they made it themselves or had it made in-house by their servants. They no longer wore the very rouged cheeks of the Georgian period. Instead, they just confined a tiny bit of rouge to the lips. And instead of the eyebrows being kind of a real focus, it was now a thin application of kohl to the lash line. So what you would do is you would get powdered kohl. I'm going to hold it really far away from my white gown. This is as black can be, and it's powder. And what you would do is you would take an ivory pin and you would breathe on it to warm it up. Then you would dip it in the kohl and apply it to the lash line to slightly darken and give the appearance of, a thick kind of lashes, but obviously they didn't have mascara or anything like that. So that was effectively it for the makeup. The hair, again, like I said, changed kind of styles. Now they did sometimes still use false hair pieces, and in 1821, Mariah was in England with her 2 younger sisters, and she said that her sister Fanny had gotten like a tress, basically a fake hairpiece, and she had wound her own hair or plaited her own hair in among it, so that it kind of made her own hair look fuller and thicker. So basically plaiting your hair and winding it into a bun, kind of at the crown of your head. This was extremely popular for the majority of your hair. The front hair was almost always curled and was in ringlets. I'd love to show you properly, but it's falling down. Sometimes they would take their own hair and they would like pin it up in curls underneath, like the braid, and that would still give this appearance of volume of hair. Sometimes they would like pin it up in curls over it and have a very Roman look to it. And then what they could do is they might tie something called a bandeau around all of it. They'd wind it kind of around the head a few different ways to basically look, you know, more like the Roman statues of the period, that sort of thing. So, you know, okay, that's not very fetching, but they looked lovely at the time. They didn't have their hair hanging all around them. So that would be a very popular style. I need to do something with this because it's going to drive me crazy. I'll just try and pin it up. So this started to take off popularity from about 1795 onwards, and this was kind of the dominant sort of like hairstyle or whatever. I'm just going to live with that for about 25 years or so. So this style of gown was pretty popular for a while, but it came to be superseded by a style that dress historians call the bib front gown. So,
Sorry.
you're grand. I'm happy for a chance to rest my voice.
Do you need any water, Melissa? There's a
I just need to
glass
actually
there.
take a sip of
There's a
water.
glass there. You want? Yeah.
So this gathered type of gown kind of gave way to what we call a bib front gown. Oh yeah, there's a sash on that. So this kind of gave way to a slightly, only very slightly more structured style that we would call like the High Regency. So again, the waistlines were still under the bust, and the petticoats kind of had this new and interesting feature on them to kind of aid this look, this silhouette. They sometimes wore little cushions at the back of the petticoats like this little crescent-shaped one, just about here. And this gave what they called the Grecian bend. So you had like your shoulders kind of pulled back with the stays, and then the gown would kind of flow out over that crescent-shaped padding. But it was very little padding, you know, compared to earlier in the century prior with like the bums and all that sort of thing. So it was a tiny bit of shaping, but shaping that wasn't hugely onerous. What time have we got, Janine, by any chance?
12:10.
Okay, so about 20 minutes. Okay, that's all right.
Sorry, this
Yeah.
was worn as a daily dress, or?
That was worn as daily dress, but also it could be worn at night. Sometimes if you would wear this, like that gown in the evening, you would, like if you're going to a ball or something, to distinguish what you wore from the day from the evening, you might wear something like an open robe. So this would be like a silk gown that like obviously goes under the bosom but has a trailing length of silk behind it, and you know, could be embroidered and all that sort of thing. And of course then they really quite favoured a lot of Oriental influence. So they might wear a turban over all of that. And that again was great if you didn't have a lot of hair. You could just hide the fact you didn't have a lot of hair by wearing a silk turban or some style, you know, on the head, and just curl the front of your hair and kind of leave the rest of it, you know, like so. So that was a really good. I should take a picture of me when I do it. I'm ready. So the next style of gown was, like I said, this bib front gown. And I'll discuss this little thing in a moment, because I have an excellent quote I want to read to you. And this style of gown kind of then took over from that earlier style. That one kind of fell out of favour by 1805, and this next style of gown stuck around for like another good 5 years. We tend to get kind of 5 years out of a fashion. So fashion is really speeding up now into, you know, something will stay trendy for quite a while with differences, but it'll eventually be superseded by something else. So, thank you. So again, we have this gauzy, floaty, see-through muslin. And the sleeves are getting shorter and puffier. And again, we have the flaps, the internal flaps, that get pinned.
They're just straight pins, really?
Just straight pins. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's being pinned into a busk, so there's no chance of it hitting the body. Now, one interesting thing, if you've read Northanger Abbey, at the start when Catherine Morland goes to her first ball in Bath with Mrs. Allen, and Mrs. Allen runs into Mr. Tilney, I mean literally like runs into him, and she gets caught on him, and she says, oh, the pin in my sleeve must be caught on your, like she gets stuck to him. So she was probably wearing some sort of sash, like a drapery, and she had it pinned to her sleeve or her shoulder, and that, because the room was so crowded, that it got caught on Mr. Tilney's sleeve when they were like trying to get past him, and that's how Catherine Morland met her husband, you know. So that was their meet cute. So now this has this bib, which basically gets, there are buttons kind of up here at the top. This could also be pinned, and this gets buttoned up here, and then there is long waistbands or strings that go around the back and get passed through some loops. You can see it. Yep. So it gets a bit more complicated. Thank you, perfect. But now this was the style for the next few years. And Mariah had a great insight into, where did I throw it? Mariah had great insight into changing fashions and predicting basically where fashions were going to go. So she basically wrote, oh yeah, hold on. In 1804, she wrote that, I can smell the downfall of chamisettes. So these were chamisettes. This is what filled in the neckline for day wear, just like the fichus and neck handkerchiefs had done earlier or later in the 18th century. And she says to her friend, I beg you will work no more. So working meant basically doing embroidery. I beg you will work no more. For I observed at Castle Forbes, which I guess isn't too far away from here, les élégants, so the elegant women, wore plain muslin kerchief crosses as in days of yore. So they had gone back to the earlier fashion of just the cross kerchiefs. Beneath their gowns every morning. And another more certain omen. We met women in dirty roads, in red cloaks with worked chamisettes peeping from under them. So basically poor women had now started wearing worked chamisettes, and the rich people did not want to wear the same fashions as the poor people. So every time fashion trickled down to the poor people, the rich had to like scramble to find the next fashion thing, so that you were visually distinct from, you know, the classes were visually distinct. So during the daytime, as well, they would also wear sleeves that were in these gowns. Now I very stupidly forgot the sleeves at home that matched this gown, but I'll just show you in another similar style of gown. Long sleeves were not actually like set in to the sleeve head, but they were tacked into basically with very large stitches into the bottom of the sleeve proper. So during the daytime, like before you got dressed, you would have your maid tack on sleeves, and these would be different. Again, they could match the fabric, or they might be different. You know, they might be a different embroidery pattern. So they would wear that for daytime, and then in the evening they would simply like snip the thread and take those sleeves off, because then basically you would wear long gloves in the evening, or you know, possibly we go gloveless to cover your arms. Like one example I'll show you here are these are from 1820, but you can see basically like a false sleeve that would just be stitched with very large stitches into the bottom of the proper sleeve, and this would again be for day wear. So chemset and long sleeves for day wear. Now there were ways to basically jazz this up, because this can get quite boring after a while wearing a straight white gown all the time. So one way to jazz it up were to make these tiny little garments called sleeveless spencers. They don't use hardly any fabric at all, but they would be made out of all sorts of colours with different decorations or trim put on them. So like for instance, I've got this pale purple one here, but Neve is showing you, or Mrs. Billimore is showing a dark purple one with gold, and that has different, you know, they would have different flounces at the back, or it would be, I'm all twisted.
Yeah.
I'm really twisted.
Yeah.
Sorry. You're grand. Yeah, there we go. So these would basically help to jazz up an outfit, maybe either during the day or for the evening. If you wore the same outfit, you know, the same gown all day, you might put on a sleeveless spencer in the evening. And to go with these, women had essentially lost their pockets. You know, those huge pockets of the 18th century, if you wore them underneath this now, it would show, because the fabric is see-through. And you don't want this hideous lump, you know, sticking off of your leg with this very almost tight-fitting gown. So enter the reticule, or the ridicule as it was sometimes called in French, essentially the handbag. So these could be made to match the outfit you were wearing, or not. And women often made these for each other. In fact, Mariah wrote that to her sister back in Ireland. When she was in England, she says, you know, I'm carrying about the ridicule that you made me. It's my very favourite thing in the whole world. So they often made things for each other as little gifts. Mariah was making sleeves for herself in 1805, and she was also working a pair for her friend Mrs. Stewart. So they actually did quite a bit of, they didn't make the full gowns themselves, but they did make little bits and pieces for each other. So one type of garment that again was very desirable and very indicative of the Regency was the shawl. The muslin shawl. So these were imported from India, and they were made of the finest muslin, and they were embroidered by hand. I don't know if you could see the white embroidery, but white on white was incredibly unpopular in the Regency. They were very long, as you can see. And it wasn't just the owning of such an expensive imported thing. Is that dirty? Oh no, okay. It was how you wore it, how gracefully you could move and show it off, show off the embroidery, but not too much. Because it was kind of an art form, and fiddling with it, incessantly fiddling with it, was seen as a lack of elegance. So it wasn't just enough that you had it, but you had to use it properly. And the Edgeworths in general seemed to abhor fussiness in dress. One young lady visited a house that Mariah was staying at in 1806, and Mariah had some kind of harsh words to say about this young lady who was playing the piano, entertaining everybody in the evening. And she wrote, in the evening, Miss Jane Waller sang and played delightfully, but she is so affected and looked so much at her elbow while she was playing, and makes such incessant drapery work when sitting or standing that she put my father out of patience. So it was, you know, a sign of class to be able to move gracefully, but not be fiddling with it too much. Now, of course, in colder weather, you might wear a cashmere shawl, again imported from that part of the world. And again, extremely very long. And these were also embroidered. As you can see, this one is quite a lot of embroidery thread on it. And this would be warmer because it is wool than that light muslin. And they are actually surprisingly warm. In January, we had a couple of nice days and I wore this to Doneraile Court in County Cork and I was wearing that other white gown and this and I was actually fine. Even just, you know, with a light woolen shawl, it was actually quite warm. Now, if you were going to go out of doors, we should look at those red cloaked women that she spoke of. The red cardinal cloak was extremely popular all over Europe in the 18th century and in the Americas as well. But it stuck on in Ireland and England for quite a bit longer. And this was an extremely useful garment, not just because we have rain and dampness so much of the time, but because of its volume, it could kind of go over any sort of outfit. And it provides a very striking colour out in the countryside. And we see from artwork at the time that women kept wearing the red cardinal cloak in Ireland and England much longer than they did in the rest of the continent. It could also have this hood that could go up over any hairstyle, and you can really get your Scottish widows vibe going on with this sort of thing. But this wasn't the only style of outerwear that they wore, even though it was very popular. And they also wore kind of a jacket style, or not a jacket, a coat style gown called a pelisse or a pelisse. This one is made of silk, so not very good in rainy weather. You don't want to wear silk in rainy weather, but like on a crisp autumn day when it's not raining, but it's a little chilly, this would be kind of the perfect sort of outerwear to cover the arms and to keep you a little bit warm. Oh, goodness gracious. Sorry. Okay. So this would be a good form of outerwear. Now, if you're going out of doors, you really can't do without a bonnet. The bonnet would cover the hair, but worn basically out of doors. If you were visiting friends in town, and visits only lasted a short period of time, women didn't take off their bonnets when they were visiting like their friends for a short, 15-minute call, which is pretty much how long town visits lasted. So you would have darling little bonnets, basically with all sorts of feathers and ribbons and flowers attached to it. Oftentimes there was quite a lot of fashion plates that showed the latest trend in bonnets because it took very small quantities of fabric or very small quantities of ribbon. So you could update your look. Even if your gown kind of stayed the same, you couldn't afford a new gown, you could update your look with the latest bonnet. And that's how you could, let's say, keep up with the latest trends in fashion. And of course, if you're out of doors, one must protect your visage with a parasol. And this one has the added benefit of being a folding parasol, so that if you're in a carriage or what have you, you could fold it down and neatly carry it, even pop it in your reticule, so that it's not getting in the way and you can easily manage it. Now, this wasn't the only form of outerwear. There were also spencers, which were short jackets, kind of like a bolero, we would call it nowadays. I'm really going to need help with this one. Oh, there we go. We're doing it. Okay. So elegant.
I noticed with that, you were using like a hook and eye for the first time.
Yeah.
Would they have actually used those?
Oh yeah, hooks and eyes have been found as far back as Roman times.
Oh really?
Yeah. I mean, hooks and eyes have been around forever. They've been used for thousands of years. Okay. So, that one I did a hook and a thread bar. So it wasn't an eye per se, but it was a bar made of silk thread. But yeah, they've just been around absolutely forever.
I just wonder they didn't use them a bit more rather than all the pins. I mean,
But see, the problem is with the hook and eye is that you can't change shape.
oh, yeah.
You know, so a pin kind of allows you, if you've got extra fabric in it, to change shape, so you can have the tightest fit or the looser fit if you want. This is a Spencer, like this is very tight, and because it's got a button, you know, I kind of have to lace to a certain tightness, and if I don't feel like lacing that tight that day, then I can't really wear this, or I have to like really squeeze myself into it, like that. So, but this would be like a very warm version, basically, of, it's hot.
Still all coats were open at the front. So often you feel the coat here.
Yeah, but you would kind of like hold it closed a little bit, you know. You could,
cut that way, you know.
yeah, I mean, I have worn. Do you remember a couple of years ago we got like below freezing weather in December? It was like 2023, and I wanted to do an experiment. So I actually put on some of my 18th century clothing, and I put on my wool mitts, you know, to like keep my arms warm. I put on 2 neck handkerchiefs to cover my neck, and I put on that cloak, and I actually walked for a couple of miles in 0-degree weather, and I was actually sweating. The only thing that was cold was my knees, because my stocking, my hose didn't go up over my knees. That was the only thing that had like 1 layer of fabric, or no fabric on it basically, and that was the only part of me that was cold. So it actually does keep you quite warm, you know, because it's a layering technique. They did have a fashion for very tight sleeves, so it can be quite hard to get in and out of sometimes. Now, despite Mariah's not really loving, it wasn't all white gowns though, so cotton prints, gowns in like cotton with prints on them was actually quite popular, and this again would be like a morning gown or a day dress. This would be worn effectively until dinner time, and then you would change. But like I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned earlier anyway, Mariah often spent her time that she was supposed to be changing writing letters to people basically, and then having a mere 15 minutes to like scramble and get her clothes on. But if you were going to a ball, I will show you what they kind of wore. Sorry. So do you want to ask another question while I'm doing this?
I have one question.
Yes.
In the Georgian period, how did they reach the pockets? Did they lift the skirt or?
No. So do you know the petticoats? There were the 2 panels. There's a slit
Oh yes.
always left open that wasn't sewn. So basically, you'll see there's quite a big slit.
Oh, yes.
So you could just easily put your hand in through that slit and access the pocket underneath. Sorry, I should have said that ages ago.
And did fans play a part?
Yes, I've got a fan there to show you. I wish I could use it. Oh no, I'm stuck. It's not. Okay, off the way. All right. Yeah, fans played a part. That was another thing you would maybe keep in your reticule, was a fan to fan yourself. Certainly at balls, but also like obviously in summer weather. So yeah, the pale purple. So yeah, at a ball would be a time you would absolutely want to use a fan. So from about 1806 to 1810, instead of having gowns that closed down the front and that you could kind of really put on yourself, fashion kind of shifted to gowns that closed down the back, and you'd have to have a bit of assistance. Now you might notice this white frill at the top here. This is again tacked very loosely into the gown. It's a length of lace that I have gathered into a band. In the 18th century, this was called a tucker. And I'll just show you one here. I should have mentioned this earlier. It was like a length of lace or silk sewn into a band, and these would be tacked on with very large stitches. And this would kind of help prevent against ring around the collar. Do you know that yellowing of, like, especially a white shirt when you're wearing it, the collar gets very yellow. The gowns themselves, because they were usually silk, couldn't be washed. If you get silk wet, it becomes watermarked. So you did everything, the purple one, the purple, you did everything you could to try and avoid getting that dirty. So you ate carefully, and you obviously like covered yourself with napkins or an apron. And the bit that's going to get dirty from contact with the skin, you would put something removable there that you could launder quite easily. So this is a style of, say, ball gown that Mariah might have worn in the, like from 1806 to 1810. This was quite simple because, like I said, they didn't seem to really go in for a lot of frills. But for, again, you might have 2 or 3 ball gowns for a season, but you would again try to change that look up with different ways of accessorizing. So an open robe would be a very popular way of doing that, or you might tie a simple silk ribbon around your waist. They had lots of ways of crisscrossing them that were very visually interesting in the fashion plates. So this could really, jazz up an outfit. And of course, a tiara for the hair would really set things off at a ball. And they would have long silk gloves for dancing in, and these would kind of help provide a bit of almost, oh, it's inside out, that's why it's all the threads. These would provide a bit of sanitary, well, that's really inside out now, hold on. Kind of a bit of sanitary protection. You can imagine dancing with a series of different dance partners all night long and touching hands and all that sort of thing. You'd want some barrier between you and the hands of other people. So these long gloves, these are knitted of silk thread, which was one method of making them, but also kid gloves, and that extremely fine, thin leather made from, I believe, goat kid, like the baby goats basically, were also worn. So this would be appropriate ball attire. And you asked about fans. They absolutely did carry fans. Here is one that I have taken to many a Regency ball myself. These would be held in the reticule, and the ballrooms are unbelievably hot. Like they're absolutely sweltering with all the people and the candles and sometimes fires and everything. So you would want fans, absolutely. Another fun little thing they actually carried would be something called a quizzing glass. And this might be held by from a silk ribbon, attached from the neck. And you would use this to look across the ballroom and look at the fashions that people were wearing, because they were so crowded you couldn't get across the room easily. So you might go, oh yes, I see, that's what she's wearing over there, sort of thing. And it's called quizzing glass, which I love. It's just so delightfully pretentious. So then finally, we're going to end at 1820. And Mariah went on a huge journey in 1820, and fashions had really changed. The waistline started to drop. So it was no longer just under the bust, but now it was inching towards the natural waist. And they wanted that volume back again that had been there at the end of the century. And how they did that this time, instead of wearing pannier or bum rolls or like any sort of hoops, they padded the hems of the gowns to make them stand out. So I've padded the bottom 2 inches of this gown, and then I've attached rouleaux, which are rolls of fabric of the same fabric type stitched to the bottom. And it really does quite a marvellous job of making the skirts stand out all at the bottom. And fashions had basically started to kind of peek back with to that bigger style of gown. So I want to read you a very interesting excerpt. So in 1820, Mariah accompanied her 2 youngest half-sisters to France, where a recent law had been passed prohibiting new clothing from being brought into the country. And it makes for some interesting reading. So this prohibition inadvertently shows us that even though these ladies did not make their own gowns, they had dressmakers in Dublin that they wrote off to and said, oh, I want this and this, and use the pattern you've already got. Or they might send an old gown and say, hey, this still fits, make me a new gown, use this as a base or as a pattern. But it shows that they knew how they were made and how to hide extra fabric in the gowns to remake them or retrim them according to the latest styles once they got to France. So she wrote, "Now for the important subject of dress and smuggling. From all the inquiries I have made, I am convinced that there is no danger in taking over apparel that has already been actually worn and that is bona fide for our own use. But it is necessary that I should be able to take my oath as to this point. Make yourself, Harriet, and myself all large sleeves." So remember those little false sleeves I showed you? She's saying make them big, right? "Make the skirts without gores." So gores were narrower at the top and then flared out the bottom. So she's saying use the whole piece of fabric. So there's tons of extra fabric in there. "And put a breadth extraordinary in each, and put 3 or 4 tucks of half an ell in each skirt, so as to allow cutting of flounces afterwards." So tucks are generally these little, I don't know if you can see it. These basically, you pinch about an inch of fabric, fold it in half and sew it. So you'd have these like rows of tucks, basically, it's what they're called. So she's saying, make the tucks huge so that if we discover that when we get to France, that all the fashion is to have lots and lots of ruffles, we can cut all that extra fabric off and make ruffles out of that extra fabric. So basically says whatever muslin remains, so that very thin see-through fabric, I don't know, make it into a shirt. Even if the bodice is wasted, so if the bodice portion is wasted, the muslin is cheap, it would be no great loss. "Let your workmanship be as slight as possible, but let your gowns be worn by Harriet and you before I come home." So she's saying make it with huge stitches, don't be neat and tidy about it. We're going to rip these things apart and make them into the latest fashions once we get to France, and make sure you've worn it and washed it before I get there so they don't look brand spanking new. So we're going to stop at 1820, even though Mariah lived until the year 1849, and the pendulum of fashion swung to crazy proportions in the 1820s, 30s and 40s. But I personally don't enjoy those fashions. And so I don't make clothing that I don't enjoy. And I hope you've enjoyed, though, this brief foray into 40 years of fashion. And if you've got any more questions, let's have them. Let's have a go.
Are those new shoes?
No, I've worn these for many years. But they're different to the shoes of the Georgian period, yes. So slippers effectively were the shoes of the period. You lost the heel altogether. But they could be embroidered, they could be made of silk. These ones are made of leather. And then effectively, if they were like walking out of doors, they did have like little ankle boots. So these were the style effectively of ankle boots for wearing out of doors. To kind of protect the feet. And Maria was like obsessed with waterproof boots. She wrote about it a lot. So, but I guess she liked going outdoors quite a bit, and having warm, dry feet was pretty important. So, any other questions?
You made your clothes.
I've hand sewed. I've not used a machine on everything you see. The only thing I have today are the shoes. But everything else you can see I've hand sewed myself. And I've only been making Georgian, so that period, since the tail end of 2015. And I've only been making Regency really since 2020. And this is about 40% of what I've got for these periods. I have a lot more Georgian and Regency clothing. I go to Bath for the Jane Austen Festival in September every year. And I'm going for the full 10 days this year. So I am bringing everything, all the Regency stuff. And I'll probably be outfit repeating a fair bit. But you know, I'll have chamisets and handkerchiefs to like make it look different for the days. So yeah.
Are there events like that in Ireland?
No, sort of. So obviously you've got this, which I think is a great start, and I'm kind of hoping like maybe this will take off, and you know, the dressing up side will be a bit bigger. Armagh, actually, funny enough, in November has like a weekend long Georgian festival, and Neve actually went to it just this November, just gone. So you can. Were there a lot of people dressed up, or?
No, but there's a whole weekend of events celebrating Armagh's Georgian history. But one of the events that they had was this year, the theme was called the Highwayman's Ball.
Oh,
So they have characters who are dressed period appropriately, who absolutely stay in character the entire night. These are first class actors, really.
Yeah.
And they story tell throughout the evening. There was a couple of skits. There was a kidnapping by a highwayman. It was a whole event while you're eating and drinking. And I was the only person dressed 18th century, but it was wonderful. It is really worth attending. They have other events during the day. They have carriage rides. We're doing it.
You're doing it, absolutely.
Georgian carriage.
Obsessed with going in a carriage.
And there's around the streets they had characters again, you know, bowing to you as you pass. The whole thing. There's lots of other history talks, and the courthouse put on, you know, trials, and it's really quite immersive. Very, very good.
So yeah, we need to basically do better in Ireland and try to have some sort of, you know, bit more dressing up. There are some groups of people who like to dress up. So I'm part of a group called Irish Historical Costumers, and like I would be the only professional in the group. Do you know what I mean? Who does this for a living? Most people kind of they try to make stuff. It's, you know, it wouldn't be museum quality, but we're just doing it for fun. You know, so like last October we went to the Irish Georgian Society in Dublin, and we went to their house, and we just sponsored. There was a miniature exhibit, so they had miniature paintings on display. So we went dressed up and looked at the miniatures and went out to lunch, and it was just like a nice outing. And so it was pretty fun. We have tried balls before, but my God, it takes a lot of money to put one on. Like it did at the time, actually, and so it's just hard to kind of get them up and running. Like I've gone and we've rented a house up in Sligo, like a historic home. We rented it out for a weekend, and we ate and we went for walks and we did dancing in the evening and that sort of stuff. But again, we haven't done that since 2016, you know. So you'd think we'd do it all the time, but just life gets in the way, you know. So. Yeah, I don't know.
I love the Georgian because we go to the Jane Austen Festival, so every year
Yes.
we make Regency clothes, but we'd love to have a reason to make Georgian.
Well, I'm going to wear a fair bit of Georgian this year because every single day there's a different theme. So Sunday is called Sporting Sunday, and I don't want to make Regency sportswear, so I'm going to wear my redingote on the Sunday of the Jane Austen Festival because it's celebrating the birth of the 250-year anniversary of the birth of Jane Austen, and she was born in 1775. Okay. So I'm going to wear that because I'm like, this was born at the start of her life. So, and then the theme for Wednesday is on Wednesdays we wear pink. So I have a pink gown again from the 1780s called a pétan en l'air, which means a fart in the wind if you speak French. Because it's like a française, but it actually stops just at the behind. So when the wind catches it and it poofs out, it looks like you've done a massive fart. But that's got pink stripes, so I'm planning on wearing that on the Wednesday of the Jane Austen Festival in Bath. So maybe I'll see you there. Yeah. What, are you going for the whole thing, or are you going for part of
No,
it?
we just go for the first weekend.
Yes. Yeah. I can't wait. Are you going to any of the balls?
Well, I haven't booked it this year. We've gone to the balls, but you can't get. Last year we couldn't get tickets for them.
Oh, right.
But we've gone. Yeah, my sister lives there. We go every year.
Yes. See, I have friends who they're friends of the festival. Like they pay that fee to be a friend of the festival, and fortunately, like they get first dibs and they can order up to like 4 tickets or 6 tickets. So I'm like, just get me a ticket. I want to go to the Celestial Ball at the end because I have a black silk gown and I've got like some stars and a crescent, like diamante that I want to put in my hair. And for the Celestial Ball, we wore it last year. I wore it last year it was actually in the baths. We had the ball in the baths, and it was incredible. It was so good. So yeah, I love it. I just endlessly watch Jane Austen movies all the time.
I went the first time to Bath a few years ago. I was hanging out the windows. It was fantastic.
Oh, it's magnificent. It's so expensive, but it's so good. Like that's my major holiday this year. Do you know? Like I don't go on sun holidays or anything like that. We've got hot as blazes the last 2 years. So.
The last 2 years, probably.
Yeah. Oh, it was so funny. Maybe it's not funny, but last year my friend and I got caught in a rainstorm. So we had one umbrella, and she's much shorter than me, so she's standing here, and I'm squeezed in behind her under this umbrella, and I'm like, there's a patch of sun over there, and she goes, let's chase after. We're basically quoting Sense and Sensibility, and I'm like, I'm not supposed to run, and that's the bit where Marianne falls down and Willoughby comes and rescues her, and we thought it was the funniest thing, and it was like, what are we like, it's just marvellous, swanning around in dresses, going for tea and dancing. I love it. There's a lot of lectures and things like that, and I'm probably not even going to go to everything, but I just want to picnic on the green and bring a book and read a book in a pretty cover and do some embroidery. I want the soft life for a little bit. Getting the PhD was a lot of work, so a bit of relaxing is definitely on the cards. So.
On that, can I ask you, is your PhD about this?
No, it was actually in 16th century gift exchange as a political tool in Ireland. So during the Tudor conquest of Ireland, how the English crown used gift giving to kind of grease the wheels, shall we say, of conquest, but also how the Irish participants in this took the gifts and then still did whatever the heck they wanted as soon as the army left, thanks, bye-bye, so and then I delved into women's gift exchange and how they're often more successful than men when it came to gift giving and getting what they wanted, that sort of thing, and then a chapter was on people who didn't give gifts and who were essentially boycotting the government by not giving gifts of food to a feast. So how you could basically abstain from gift giving as a form of political protest, because you couldn't get anything done without gift giving. You had to, anytime a request was sent, whether it was, hey, I need some help because I got injured in the war and I can't, support myself anymore, can you help me? You had to send a hawk or something. Or if you had bankrolled the government and they hadn't paid you back and it was years, and you're I can't afford to live anymore, can you pay me the money you owe me? But you still had to send along a gift to get the request put before the Queen. So they didn't even give the gifts to the King or Queen necessarily, they gave the gifts to people who were going to put in a good word for you with the Queen, whether that was her advisors Burley and Walsingham, or an Irish woman named Elizabeth Fitzgerald, who was the Queen's best friend. She was the sister to the Earl of Kildare, and she was raised with Queen Elizabeth after her older brother Silken Thomas was executed for his rebellion. And you had people writing to her from Ireland and being hey, fellow Irish woman, can you help a brother out, sort of thing, and get me what I need. So yeah, I wrote 90,000 words on gift exchange. So yeah. But this is, I don't know if I'll do much academically with this. I actually am really getting very fascinated with Mariah Edgeworth. Reading her letters, it's so interesting. So I don't know, there might be a paper in there somewhere. I don't think anybody's written academically about her wardrobe and that sort of thing. So it might be a paper I could, yes.
You've got the book.
Oh yes!
The story you want.
Well, this was mostly if anybody had a question. How many of you have heard that older women didn't follow the current fashions, but they often wore the fashions of their youth? I don't know if you've ever heard that, but I want to debunk that myth quite a bit, because in 1839, when Mariah was 32 and 39 is what? 71 years old, okay? She writes in a letter that she was on a little ladder in her wardrobe getting something from off the top, and the rungs of the ladder burst down the middle and she fell to the ground. It's 71 years of age, but she's drawn herself in the absolute height of 1830s fashions. You got the short, full skirt, you got the huge sleeves, you got this thing here called a pelerine, which was like one of those fichus but went quite far down the shoulders, and you had the ridiculous 1830s hairstyle where they had loops of hair in like ribbons on the top of their head. So she's drawing herself in 1839 at age 71 in the latest fashions for the 1830s. So women very much did keep up with fashions. They might not have put on as much trim because like being over trimmed was considered kind of gaudy, so they might have foregone the flowers and the lace. That was more for younger women, flowers in particular, because it was associated with the bloom of youth, that sort of thing. But older women certainly wore probably a lot more jewellery than younger women did, because jewellery was, especially expensive jewellery, was more appropriate. It could be a gift from your husband. You'd already won your man, you weren't on the marriage market anymore. Now you could show off, you know, the spoils of marriage in the form of jewels and forego the roses, which would kind of, you know, show up perhaps your maybe the aging skin of it. So, but yeah, they did still follow fashions, they just did so in an age-appropriate way. And I'm afraid I'm probably going to have to let you all go. But before you go, can I please ask, there are surveys just over here, they're not very long. If you wouldn't mind, if we could get a few of you to tick them off, that'd be fine. I'm going to start undressing and packing up, so if you do want to privately ask me some questions, I'll still be here for the next hour and a half before I teach a workshop on how to make a Georgian petticoat. So thank you so much for coming out today. I really appreciate you ladies, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Well done.